As a Marine, I too have seen weird shit in the Marine Corps. By Rev Black Rage. I was reading 035 Nun's post about his experiences with weird shit in the Marine Corps. I figured I might share one of my experiences, of which I have a few. This was back in 2006 or 2007. Our battalion was experiencing a rash of break-ins at our ramp. Ramp being a fancy term for a tactical parking lot, where we park armored vehicles. Why would you want to break into the ramp? There was a maintenance bay with millions of dollars of tools and a bunch of high-end training aids, like 70-inch televisions. This was part of Camp Lejeune, also known as the Courthouse Bay. The history behind the name is that before the U.S. Marine Corps bought the land from North Carolina, the county courthouse was in that neck of the woods. The courthouse itself stood where our barracks were, and right across the bay from where the ramp was is where the gallows stood. A ramp guard was posted due to the thefts, 2 sets of men on 8-hour shifts, plus the corporal of the guard who wasn't on the ramp, but was in the barracks. Me and my buddy drew rifles and relieved the guys on guard. It was about 2200, or 10 o'clock at night. "Hey, stay frosty. The kid's out playing tonight," the COG passed along during relief. "The kid, Corporal? Who's the kid?" He just grinned and said, "Call me if you need me." There were 2 positions on ramp guard, box guy and rover. Box guy sat in a Conex box near the edge of the road, and rovered the area. We weren't the only unit in Courthouse Bay. At the time, there was a combat engineer school, MAR SOC, the Coast Guard Special Operations Training Command, and Recon Force. We kept an eye on any assets they had on that side of the bay, as a professional courtesy. I took the first walk around as rover. That's when I got the first weirdness. I was walking back amongst the vehicles, and I heard banging from inside the vehicles, and occasionally what sounded like tools being thrown across the ramp. I never found anything when I went to look. Side note, the Marine Corps has always been short on funds. It's almost like a service tradition. When one of our vehicles gets blown up or sunk, the vehicle is recovered and anything salvageable is taken off the vehicle and put into rotation as spare parts or equipment. That sledgehammer over there with the weird scorch marks on the shaft, that was pried out of the hands of a dead Marine who was holding onto it when his vehicle blew up. That final drive we pulled out of supply that's got a weird pull to it when you use it, it was on a track that sunk in the bay, that took 5 Marines to their death. It was always a joke about the vehicles being haunted, so I played it off. I wasn't going to call the Corporal of Guard over some nonsense. I'm walking back to my post in a military manner, and trying to keep the cold at bay, and trying not to freak out at the same time. I walk around back to the box and took my turn as the guy in the box. About 15 minutes into my box rotation, my cell phone lights up. It's my watch buddy. "Hey man, you're a fucking hoot, but that shit is creeping me out. Knock it the fuck off." I asked him what the fuck he was talking about, but he just grunted over the phone and told me to knock it off and hung up. I looked at my phone not knowing what the fuck he was talking about. I shrugged and shoved the phone back in my pocket. He came back around the box 15 minutes later. "The fuck you talking about, man?" I asked him bluntly. Apparently, he heard a giggle when he was walking along the tree line on the far end of the ramp. Like 2 or 3 times. I called him a retard, as people do in the military, and took my turn for a walk. The first place I went was that tree line, because I was planning on checking it out and making fun of him for being a pussy. It was dark back there. The stars were not bright. There was a full moon, but along the tree line was darker than shit. I was walking along, not really paying attention, when I heard a twig snap inside the trees. I turned around and brought my rifle up. Bullshit guard duty or not, there were still black bears in North Carolina, and I didn't plan on getting eaten by one. I didn't know what a 5.56 would do to a bear, but I had 30 chances to find out, and I was willing to go on a journey of discovery. I looked into the trees directly in front of me. It was damn near pitch black. I started to get that creepy feeling you get when you're being watched. like the shadows are staring back at you. I backed up a few steps. Nothing happened. I waited a few more heartbeats, just staring at the shadows with my rifle at the ready. That's when I caught movement. It was about 3 feet tall, maybe 4, but that's all I could make out. It stood looking in my direction for a few seconds, from about 10 feet inside the tree line. My eyes adjusted a little, and I could make the vague outline of a person, a kid or a midget or something. It continued just doing nothing. Then, like that, it turned and moved off. It looked like it got about 3 feet, and then fully disappeared into the shadows. Like, ceased to exist type disappeared. I stood watching for a moment, trying to rationalize what I had just seen. A hog, maybe? Recon guys fucking with us? Now that has happened before. There was a pretty bad rivalry between us and them. Not a professional one either. Just 2 tribes of testosterone-charged guys in their early 20s. A tribal conflict was inevitable. But that was pretty chilled out now. Maybe I had just imagined it. Probably. Nothing will fuck you up like your own imagination. I returned to walking my post, but kept glancing over my shoulder. I kept telling myself that it was just my imagination, nothing more, nothing less. I couldn't shake it though. I made my way back to the box and did a turnover. My watch buddy seemed a little withdrawn, yet kinda weird. Almost jumpy. I asked him if everything was alright. He told me he felt like he was being watched the entire time, and it was freaking him out. I told him about the shadow at the tree line. He looked at me with genuine fear in his eyes, and we agreed not to go back there for the rest of the night. I offered him a smoke and he took it. He mostly hung around with inside of the box during his rove. It came time to shift from the guy in the box to the rover. My buddy was just a bundle of nerves, but I was still cool to rove. I had a loaded rifle and body armor, and at this point in my military career, I still thought I was invincible. So, I went to rove. I wandered back towards the motor tee and the Coast Guard docks behind the building. The feeling of being watched popped up on my radar again. I looked towards the concrete dock. Something was off, and I couldn't tell what it was. Until it moved. The top of what looked like a head dropped beneath the edge of the closest dock, like someone had been poking their head over the dock and was just watching me. I would like to say that I was a total badass here, and I raised my rifle and ordered them out into the light. I did no such thing. I stood frozen, a sort of fearful indecision stopping me in my tracks. I heard something splash out of the water just on the far side of the dock I was watching. Something poked out in my mind. It was my duty to figure it out. It was my duty to walk over there to look down into the water. There was another splash. This time I could see the water splashing onto the dock itself. The splashes were getting bigger, like some fisherman had reeled in a shark that had plenty of fight left in it. I did a brass check on my rifle and did my best to steady my nerves. I made a fist and knocked my body armor to make sure that it was still there. I was still religious at the time, so I may have uttered a prayer or two. I took one step forward, and I heard it. A sing-song giggle floating on the winter breeze. I heard it as soon as my butt hit the concrete. Nope. That was enough to dissuade me of any desire to look in that water. Some badass Marine I was. I turned on my heels and booked it back to the perceived safety of the Connex box. I think I ran a quarter mile to the box and, well, it may not have been a record, but it was fucking fast. As soon as I got there, I noticed that the box was closed. I called out for my post buddy, and the door on the box creaked open. I asked him what he was doing in there. He shrugged half-heartedly and said something about it feeling safer. I nodded. I understood. He asked me for a smoke. I realized I needed one too. As I was fishing out my pack, I brought up calling Corporal of the Guard. And say what? Shit's creepy? He shot back, nerves in his voice. He did have a point. I popped a smoke in my mouth and lit it. I held out my lighter to light his smoke. He leaned in, cigarette first, and froze just as I was about to light it up. His eyes widened suddenly, staring over my shoulder. I sighed. I knew I was going to turn around and there was going to be some weird shit behind me. I remember thinking, alright, let's get it over with. I turned around and there was, in fact, weird shit behind me. It was a child, a little girl, standing about 100 yards up, dead center of the road. She was dressed in a white dress, an older style dress. Like the kind you would see on little girls in old cowboy movies. If you're thinking something along the lines from The Girl from the Ring, I'm sorry to disappoint, but she looked normal. Almost as if she had been pulled out of a Rockwell painting. Well, except for her eyes. Her eyes were just made of evil. I can't describe them except to say that they had no place in a child's head. When I looked into her eyes, I felt hate in my soul. It was fucking chilling. I once looked into the eyes of a jihadist as he bled out from a chest wound. That amount of hate in his eyes was the only thing I ever seen that came close to this child's eyes. I looked at my buddy, and he looked back at me. Neither of us knew what to do. We just knew that that shit was wrong. The child started walking towards us. Oh, fuck, my buddy muttered. And to be fair, that was a valid point at the time. The giggle floated across the wind again. But it didn't stop this time. It was like that it was on a loop, but each time it played it was slightly different. At one point it was higher pitched, at another it was lower. Mixed with those eyes that never broke contact, it was very disconcerting. I started to get dizzy as she moved closer. The edges of my vision started to dim, started pushing towards the center. She was getting closer. I tried to bring up my rifle and drill the little shit right between those evil, creepy-ass eyes. But my arms wouldn't cooperate. She came closer. I tried to move backwards, but my legs wouldn't play ball. She came closer. I tried to tell my buddy to get the fuck out of here, but my mouth wouldn't do its thing. She was almost there when I saw it turn down the street. Salvation rides in a 2003 Chevy passenger van. As soon as the headlights lit her up, she was gone, and I could move again. I demonstrated this by falling onto my knees and gasping. I instantly felt like I had a motherfucker of a hangover. The van rolled up to us and the passenger door swung open. "You boots okay?" It was the corporal of the guard. I responded by vomiting. The COG chuckled. "I told you, the kid was out playing tonight." I would like to take this opportunity to thank my $10 and above patrons, in order, of course. Dan R., Paul Z., Mr. Swiston, Official Jerboa, Chaos X, JY, Pyromancer, Hayden MH, and Dan R. And of course, all the $5 patrons that are listed in the description. And if you want your name read off at the end of every video, please go to the Patreon link down below. You get your name read off or name in the description, and you get some Patreon-only content. I think that's a pretty good deal.